Hello, hello, everyone. It is Irene here, and I am broadcasting it's Thursday today, January 30th, 2020. And the topic that I'm getting into today are the 5 common myths around healing trauma and nervous system health. And the reason why these are so important to understand, it's because we're in a situation right now, in a state where there are a lot of, let's call them ingredients, being thrown out to help folks heal and become more regulated in their nervous systems and release trauma from the system, but we're not putting the full meal together, so to speak. And I think that's okay because we're new here in this world of understanding how to work with trauma at the nervous system level, at the body, somatic level, etc. So I'm going to be diving into these 5 common myths. They are breath work, shaking, cold therapy, meditation, and positive thinking. So as we get folks on the line, if you're watching this replay, thank you for watching the replay. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for clicking over to YouTube and watching the full length in one go. I appreciate it. So what I want to do, who is here? I'd love to find out who am I talking to? I can see 20 nervous systems saying hello, 25, the number's going up. I'm hoping I'm coming through loud and clear. Hello, Elizabeth. Hey there, Crystal. The other thing that I want to make note of right now that's timely, and I'm going to date this video, is we're at the end of January 2020, and this is a really big and important time in my company with my team, in that we are leading up to the run of my big online program called Smart Body, Smart Mind. We run this only once a year, and that happens starting March 2nd, and that goes for 3 months into the beginnings of June 2020, and we will open enrollment as of February 17th, 2020. Enrollment closes March 1st. So if you know that you want to start working with me and actually getting into this work at this nervous system, somatic, regulation-based level, and learn with me and my team of 10 professionals that are in there helping and answering questions, this is the time to get in. If you haven't yet seen my 3-part healing trauma series, be sure to get into that. If you've done the healing trauma series, let me know. I'd love to see your comments. If you have done Smart Body, Smart Mind, let me know. If you're one of my alumni, if you're in 21 days, which is the 21-day nervous system tune-up, let me know that as well. That's a smaller self-study course that is in some ways that first step towards nervous system apprenticeship. So I'm just going to look in the comments here. I'm going to move my screen over so I'm not looking at myself as I talk to you, which is always an interesting thing. Okay, so hello. We've got Kristen from SC, I think that's probably South Carolina. Bella from Sweden, hello. Chris from Australia, hello. Sylvia from New Zealand. You guys are up early. It's early there for you, isn't it? Thanks, Crystal, for popping up the Smart Body, Smart Mind link. Another New Zealander. My goodness, all you guys are up. I guess it's not that late, not that early, is it? Hey there, Kim. Hitchcock, hope you are well. You guys are in Wisconsin, I think. You were just at 1440 with me for our Up and Down event with Elia, which was a blast. And for those of you also, just a little housekeeping, another thing that I do frequently is I teach workshops, like in person, live, not all online. It's group with my colleague and my good friend Elia Marak, and we do something called Up and Down, and it is a great fun way to get into a group, work on social engagement, movement awareness in a real safe and fun space. So just needed to give that program a plug. Bella asks, how much does it cost? So the program, the Smart Body, Smart Mind program, comprehensive program, is $1997, so $1,997. And there's a payment plan of 12 payments over 12 months, obviously 12, and that's $197. And so that program is comprehensive in that it is a full, it's almost like, if not is, a university course. When you do the program, you get it for life. You have the materials forever to learn with and you get to join this incredible community. So be sure to check that out. Rhode Island, hello. Is it for people who want to heal trauma or people who want to be healers? It is for people personally to heal their own trauma. I did a call, Bella, last week for mind-body professionals, and I talked about how the program is suited for personal development, but it also will help our professional development, because when you get more regulated in your own body and you're more connected to yourself and you are just more attuned to your own rhythms and you have greater regulation, that indirectly or really directly impacts and influences those you're working with. But it is not a training program. By no means could you ever become trauma trained in 3 months. I'll say that right now, and this will actually go really nicely into what we're talking about today, which are the 5 common myths around healing trauma and nervous system health. We need to be very, very stringent when we're looking to work with people to help us heal at the nervous system level, because it is not a sanctioned, government-based, federally approved healing method. There isn't one way to do it right now. It's not like going to medical school and becoming a physician or a surgeon, where the schooling is pretty much the same across all boards. I mean, there's variations, of course, within, but right now in our healing trauma world at this somatic level, we're really young in this industry, so to speak. So be sure to do your research. I have a great vlog called How to Find a Good Somatic Practitioner, which talks about the things that as a person you need to look for in a somatic practitioner. But we're really in a bit of a pickle right now, if I use that word, because we just don't have enough people to help those who are now looking for this work. And that is one of the reasons why I started to do this work online really seriously about 5 years ago. Started to create my courses 6 years ago, because it wasn't efficient for me to work with people one-on-one, teaching you guys the stuff that you're learning within my healing trauma trainings, within the programs. It just was not time efficient for me to draw diagrams over and over and over again with my clients when they were paying me really top dollar for a one-on-one session. And a lot of the work that has to be done around building more resiliency, restoration of the system, and regulation has to happen when you're not with a practitioner. It's everything you do when you're outside of that practice, when you're cooking dinner, when you're getting ready to go, when you're outside driving, when you're relating with people in the environment. The practices are really something that has to be done with you, the person, not with a person teaching you how to do something. Of course, you need to learn that from the outset, but then we need to pull away from the teacher, so to speak, so that we start to make the work for ourselves. I did a video a few weeks ago, giving you guys lots of resources to go check out, on an analogy. Really good analogy, which is doing this work as adults now, and I'm assuming everybody here is an adult. It's like learning a second language as an adult and learning it fluently. Okay, so I'm going to keep going through here. Hello, Katrin from Stockholm. Yes, we'll be back. I hope we're still getting things set up in Stockholm for September for our up and down. Australia. All right, I'm going to get into some of these pieces here. I'm going to make sure that I'm not missing any questions as we get started. Hello from Scotland. This is fun. I like to see where everybody's from. Jillian asks, what do I think about Psych K work? Is it also part of the somatic practice work? I do not do Psych K myself. One of our team members, Denise Warner, does have training in Psych K. So you could go into our Facebook group, our Healthy Nervous System Revolution Facebook group, go to one of the threads right now where we're taking questions around the healing trauma training, and you could ask about that and we'll see that. But from what I know, it's not all you need. And the reason why I know that is Denise had that training and she's now in the somatic experiencing training, and she's done Smart Body, Smart Mind. And you know, it's not one practice or one method or one technique alone that is going to help us restore and regulate. And as I mentioned when I started this call a few minutes ago, right now we have a lot of ingredients in this world, but we haven't put together the full course, 10-course meal with wine pairings, dessert, and the cheese platter, for example, right? We're putting things in these places separately and we're not putting them all together. So hopefully that answers a little bit of your questions around Psych K. I've experienced it through Denise, from what I've experienced, it is definitely not enough, but it does not form the practice I do, but I am aware of it. Hello, Toronto, Florida, Netherlands, Cornwall. Awesome. Okay, let's get into this, and I'll do my best to see the comments as they come through for the questions that you have around what I'm talking about today. So the theme is the 5 common myths when healing trauma and working at the nervous system level. And the first one, I'll name them again. So breathwork, shaking, cold therapy, meditation, and positive thinking. I'm going to start with, which one am I going to start with? I'm going to start with shaking first, because that one is one of the simpler ones to talk about. And here's what we know. Here's what I know. When we have a traumatic event occur to us that is bigger, and I'm thinking about a video. Who's seen the video of, it's a National Geographic video, and the researchers are trying to tag a polar bear. Crystal might be able to find that video. We have it somewhere within our databases. But basically, they tranquilize the polar bear with a tranquilizer dart. And of course, he, falls down and he's unconscious. And then they put the tag on him so they can follow him and see his patterns. And as that polar bear is coming out of the shock state of the anesthetic, he starts to shake. And the researcher is so great because he knows exactly what's going on, and he talks you through it. He says he's the shaking, and he goes, now if we let him keep going, we're going to see soon he's going to have, and then the guy goes, and there's the deep breath. And then all of a sudden you can almost feel through the video, this polar bear's whole body just starts to breathe again. And then he goes, and then he's going to sleep it all off and let go of the shock from this event. When he starts the shaking, you see his big paws doing this. And it isn't just this, hairy, carry, crazy shaking. It's a very deliberate procedure of running. He's completing the running response. I'll say that one more time. He's completing the running response. So that is a shock trauma to that polar bear. He knew he was being hunted. He was trying to flee from the hunt. In that instance, he doesn't actually have fears per se. It's just a pure survival autonomic reaction to get the heck out of there. And of course he can't. So in the midst of the running, he gets not put down, but tranquilized. And so when he comes out, he has to complete that running response through this, what we would call shaking. But it's actually a very specific, it's called procedural memory that he is or she is completing. When you print something, so you've got a computer, you probably have one in front of you right now, and you send print to the printer. My printer's back there. That's why I'm pointing back there. And let's just say there's a problem in the network, or the cable isn't plugged in properly, and it just says it's not happening. You're pressing print, and then you finally get it connected, and what happens? You print like 40 pages because you kept pressing print, not realizing that it was connected. Procedural memories are like that, in that if we have got a traumatic event and we're trying to get away, maybe we're trying to fight, maybe we're trying to protect our head from the ball coming at our head, maybe we're trying to steer the car to another direction, but we couldn't because we got hit. All these, there's so many examples. If we don't get to complete that, there will be a written instruction, like the printer job, a procedure in our memory banks of our nervous system connected to our muscles that are trying to make us flee or move or contract. So when we've had a shock trauma and there is a big event, there may be cause for a shake to come out, the legs to run. I've worked with people where their hands wanted to protect their face, or they wanted to hit, or they wanted to scratch. And it starts with a movement that might look like a shake, but then so often it goes into a physical behavior pattern of protection. This is one of the better examples because I can show it to you with my hands. You know, balls coming at you, you saw it too late and you froze in that moment of seeing the ball, but there's still this desire to protect and, you know, contract the spine and look away and all these things. So usually, often, it's bigger shock traumas that determine such shaking, such movement responses. We have kind of married the fact that to heal trauma means we have to shake, and that is inaccurate. And sometimes if the trauma suits, you know, that response of shaking it out, then we want that to occur. The difference between it coming out organically, if we think of that polar bear, he isn't there trying to make a shaking response happen. He's not there trying to stretch out the muscle to create a stretch reflex so that it triggers a shaking response. He is not thinking about the shaking because he is fully connected to his body in the environment, natural, organic, doesn't give a shit what people are going to think when they're watching him. He's just letting it come out. That is how we want these procedural memories and these, let's call them shaking responses, to come out. We want it to be uninhibited. We want it to be contained such that we know what's going on and we're connected to it, but we can't force it to happen. We just can't force it. What happens, and I've seen this when people have tried to force shaking out, as happens in a practice called trauma release exercise, is that it can, and I've seen this, it can create a loop in the system where the procedural memory wants to come out, but because the conscious brain is looking for a shaking response, the person might miss the fact that there's a very, and I'm going to just show you this with my hand, that they might miss the fact because they're getting into the big muscles of the pelvis and the spine and the hamstrings and the quadricep muscles. They might miss the fact that there is this tiny little wave coming through the hand that would be the precursor to the hands starting to lift, to protect essentially the brain. The main purpose of our system, the survival response, in many ways is to protect the brain. We will always try to protect our head, face, eyes, ears, our senses. So if we go into these big cathartic movements to try to get the engine going, so to speak, and rev up the shaking response, and we're not fine-tuned to pick out the nuance of these procedural memories, we're going to miss the fact that that trap and that levator scapula is starting to spasm a bit, and it's starting to quake and quiver a bit, and I'm going to follow that into this procedural memory completion so that I can complete that accident that didn't get done properly. I hope that makes sense. The other thing about shaking, and actually my husband wrote a great article. His name is Seth. He's also a colleague. It's called, I might get it 100%, but there is no exercise to heal trauma. It's something like that. Crystal can pop it up. And it comes back to, we have to know what our system needs and the type of traumas it has endured and survived. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. In the wild, it's a little different because there aren't conditions, there aren't cultural practices, there aren't these assertions of this is how you behave here and this is how you behave here. That higher brain complexity that we have as humans, that's what's put the wrench in the spokes, so to speak, of this, machine we have. Is we've got a lot of these supposed tos and shoulds and shouldn'ts and don't do that there, that it has stopped our organic process of processing old traumatic events. So that article that Seth wrote talks about specifically things that we do to try to create a trauma release. In our line of work, we're sort of purists. He and I and my team here with Team Lion and those who study with Peter somatic experiencing, Kathy Kane's work, we're looking for that automatic natural response so that the system gets the right thing done. And I didn't finish my thought a few seconds ago about those that do lots of shaking exercises. It's very much the work of bioenergetics. I think it's Alexander Lowen. A lot of these practices are trying to get this catharsis going, to get the energy and get the life force energy moving. I did a vlog on that a little while ago. It's a shorter one. Crystal, you could probably find it. I talk about Kundalini energy and cathartic work. I think it might be 2 videos separately, but we want to get the life force energy back into our system, but we want to do it in a way that is timed right for the system's capacity. If we try to put too much in before it's big enough to take that big load of life force energy, the system is going to fracture and it won't know what to do with it. I'm sure there's a million ways that I could give you an analogy for that, but you can only fit so much water into this cup. If I start pouring my tea into here, it's going to be a disaster, right? So this idea of building capacity in the body through gentle sensory awareness exercises first, building capacity to be with emotion, to feel our bodily impulses first, is very, very key. So that is my piece on shaking. The other thing too is when we've come from upbringings that are more early trauma based, maybe we didn't have good attunement, good regulation from the start, maybe there was lack of secure attachment. That type of early trauma is not like a shock trauma. And the way we would work with that, there might not be enough capacity in the system to even mount the energy for procedural memories to come out. Again, I'm speaking a little more advanced here, but it's important to know that if someone is more frail in their constitution and they are, say, living with a chronic illness, I talked about chronic illnesses last week in my Q&A, which is very common with those who have not healed early trauma, developmental trauma, attachment that was ruptured, those sorts of early adversities. It renders a person to have a very, very weakened nervous system, and that the rigor and the regulation isn't there. They don't have typically the energy, the life force energy, to even mount a procedural memory coming out, because the system is so worried, not the best word, but it's worried about all the general organ functions. Someone with a chronic illness, usually there's gut troubles, immune system problems, hormonal, reproductive, just general circulation to the vessels and the muscles and the brain isn't good. So those housekeeping needs of the system, of the physiology, they take precedent over a procedural memory completing. And if we take someone who has that more frail nervous system constitution and we put them into a shaking class and we try to rev up the system, it's going to say, screw you, or they might feel elated because of the endorphins that are coming through, but then they crash. And a lot of people will say, I went to that. Usually these things happen at weekend workshops where everybody gets all rah and everyone shakes and screams and does all these things. And if your system isn't ready for that, it can really fracture it. So I'm just going to look at the comments here. Thanks, everyone. Okay, some of these things are on breath, so I'm going to get into breath in a second. Lynette, I'm going to read your question because it looks really interesting. It says, hi, Irene, what are your thoughts on individuals who promote themselves? Oops. I need my screen to be a bit bigger here. Bear with me, you guys. I'm still rewiring my brain to use a different kind of computer. Okay, who promote themselves as alpha female. Is this really a sympathetic protective state the individual is living in? I have never heard of that term, alpha female. I mean, alpha in the animal kingdom means the one who is like the main kahuna, right? The leader. It is usually a male, just because of testosterone and strength. I mean, that's just the reality. So I don't know what that is. Maybe expand for me, because now I'm curious as to what that means. Margaret says, I keep waking up trembling and not knowing what to do and how to calm myself down. I find as soon as I start doing exercises, I start shaking quite violently. If I don't, I'm in total shutdown. So Margaret, this could be connected to that early trauma, developmental trauma that I just mentioned. I'm going to make a generalized assumption that perhaps that was something that you lived with and survived with. And I think you're one of our 21-day members. I'm not sure, but I think you are. So there is a thing when we have got this early trauma that is unresolved and unhealed, the survival physiology is essentially running the front of our bus. It is looking for danger. It is feeling that it is in danger. And there is this sense that things are not safe in general. It's very neurophysiological. So this waking up, shaking is often, and again, everyone's different, and I don't know your history, is often this general whole body dysregulation of the system having this sympathetic arousal. And so what I suggest for folks that are living in this state and surviving in this state is we need to do things that are much more gentler to help re-regulate and provide more safety and connection with the system to obviously the environment and to yourself. And so this is where a lot of the practices that we do within Smart Body, Smart Mind, or working with a practitioner who's trained in Kathy Kane's work, working with the kidneys and the adrenals, working with the gut and the brainstem, working with an area of the heart called the mediastinum. Again, these are all things that I can't teach you ethically this way, but we do them in the programs, or a really good practitioner who's trained at a high level with Kathy and trained in SE will know how to do. So we have to think, and again, I'm making an assumption that if there wasn't a strong foundation built in the system, there's this shaky ground, literally shaky ground, that was built, and the system is looking to have that foundation. So the foundational practices of restoring regulation back to the system are working with the kidney adrenals, providing them with safety and what we would call a safe haven, having connection to really just, I'm here, I'm okay, and no one is here to get me. And the thing is the unconscious won't be so sure about that. It'll be like, no, like you're telling me that this is safe, but everything in the history, the entire map that I have, the trauma map that I have, says no safety anywhere. And we have to start to rewrite and rewire and rebuild that map so that the system can start to find more safety. It's important for a lot of these exercises, or a lot of these, I should say, elements I'm talking about, we want to be working with those during the daylight. So let's just say the shaking doesn't happen in the day, but it happens when we wake up in the morning. This is where we want to actually practice being with the body, being with the physiology, being with these kidneys and adrenals and brainstem and gut and the heart area in the daylight when things are actually a bit better. Because at night, that's when all of the unconscious stuff starts to bubble up. That's when the neurophysiology is like looking to kind of say, hey, hey, we're still here and we're still frightened and you need to help us. So exercises, movement is important. You say here, I start doing exercises, I start shaking quite violently. When the shake goes so violent that we can't contain it, that is not useful. That is just going to loop the system. And so when I was in private practice, often if a shake came out that was uncontained and the person couldn't really feel and be with, I would find a way to contain them. I usually would have to put pressure on their legs, on their shoulders, on their pelvis. And it's almost like saying to a horse that's wild, whoa, 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 like, come on down, you know, come on down, girl. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Like, shh, right? Just like a baby that's gotten frantic. We're in some ways, it's that frantic nervous system that is desperately seeking safety because it's been living in terror. And so the other thing, and this will go into, I'm going to talk about cold therapy next, because this goes nicely in with that. If our map, our trauma map has known chaos and high level of arousal, while it doesn't feel good, the system will keep going to that light because it knows it really well. And so sometimes what occurs is when we've had this early history of unsafety, being in a lot of terror, seeing a lot of horrific things, being in this sympathetic adrenalized response with a lot of shutdown, we will seek out, without even realizing it, practices that replicate that physiological essence, right? So we'll see folks who have that high level of rev go to practices that mimic that or offer that because it actually feels safe, quote unquote, but really what's occurring is it's just matching that physiology. It's kind of true too when people get into abusive relationships, when they grow up in an abusive household. You know, people say, I don't know how people do that. How do they stay in that abuse? How do they stay in that toxicity? It's like, well, if you grew up in toxicity and you don't know anything different, that is actually safe for them, even though it isn't. It's not accurate. So definitely important to understand, all of us, our history, what occurs in the physiology, and then also know that when we are healing this, the healing aspect, the re-education, the rewiring will often sometimes seem very confusing and many ways sometimes boring because it's not giving us the same adrenalized response. So I'm going to go into cold therapy. There's been a very, and if you've got comments and questions, I'll come back to those. There's a very hot thing right now, which is doing ice baths. So going into freezing cold water and staying there for like minutes at a time. Now, this got popularized. I don't know how it got popularized, except for I know there's a man named Wim Hof who is really popularizing this, and he's become quite the guru in the fields of health and healing. Even though his background isn't in that, that's what he's popularizing. Now, there's a difference between immersing in freezing cold water and staying there beyond the comfort level of your physiological system. There's a difference between that and doing what we would call a cold plunge or a cold rinse after a hot shower or after a sauna or after a hot tub. I'm all for really good hydrotherapy. And I'm studying it a little bit more in my own personal time because I'm finding it helps with the inflammation I get in my knee because I've had multiple knee surgeries on my legs. And so I find that that transition between hot and cold helps the circulation. And that's why, back in the day when you had a sprained ankle, the common thing was bucket of cold, bucket of hot, and you move them back and forth. And the purpose is to get the circulation going and then to constrict the circulation and then to get it going. But that is not something that you would keep doing after that ankle was healed. You wouldn't keep doing it necessarily if it healed up well, and you wouldn't keep your ankle in that cold water to the point where it is numbed out and you don't feel it. So what is happening within these immersions in ice cold water is the person, the human, is going into what's called the dorsal response, the dorsal shutdown of the parasympathetic nervous system. So quick review, the parasympathetic is part of the autonomic nervous system. The other branch is the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for slowing things down. Now, the slowing down has two different branches. One is a slowing down that is what we would call rest digest slowing down, where it's allowing the system to go into repair, into rejuvenation, into repairing the gut lining, into enhancing the immune system. So there's a part of that parasympathetic that is called the low dorsal of the parasympathetic. The other slowing down is called the ventral. I'm going to add one more in a second. And be sure to watch the polyvagal video I did where I get into this a bit more deeper, but this is like Cole's Notes, Cliff's Notes version. So the ventral of the parasympathetic, that's social engagement. So right now, if I make funny faces to you, bleh, and you mimic me and we laugh, or we talk to each other in a real nice, calming, soothing, empathetic way, that's using our ventral vagal of the parasympathetic. You look at a dog on the street and you kind of do that with your head and he looks at you and he turns his head. That's that action happening. That's the social engagement part of our nervous system. It's called the ventral portion of the parasympathetic. The only reason it's called ventral is that nerve of the vagus nerve comes out the front, in front of the brainstem, rather than dorsal, which is the back. So slowing down is the parasympathetic. The one branch of the parasympathetic I did not mention is called the dorsal branch of the parasympathetic, and it's called the high tone. This is what that polar bear would have gone into, deep high tone dorsal shutdown when it was tranquilized with the tranquilizer. This is what we would go into if we broke our leg and we were losing blood from our femoral artery. Our system would, everything would slow down, the blood pressure goes down, the heart rate goes down, our need for oxygen decreases, because the system is like, this is like life or limb. If you've heard that term before, life or limb, in first aid, you always take care of internal injuries first. If someone's, got a broken arm and it's not impacting the circulation, you worry about that later. You worry about what's happening in the internal organs. So when we go into deep shock, we go into this dorsal vagus nerve pathway that shuts everything down and preserves the system. And it's almost like preparing for death, so to speak. The other interesting part to this, the big animals in the ocean, so the sea creatures that live really low deep, and the whales and all the sea life that can stay in freezing cold water and be low down in the sea and need very little oxygen, they survive because they live primarily in that dorsal branch of the parasympathetic. It's called the dive reflex. The interesting thing, though, us humans, we have it too, but we are mammalian and we are warm-blooded, and we're not meant to live in that situation. Humans need a lot of oxygen. We have a lot of this brain power. Brain needs lots of oxygen. It needs lots of glucose. So we need oxygen. We need warmth to function well. This is what occurs when we go into this cold-induced ice therapy. The system starts to realize, they're not coming out. They're staying in there. And the system starts to go slowly into that dorsal because it has to. it feels that it is being frozen from the outside in. And so things start to slow down. And so if you watch people, you can find video footage of people going into these ice baths and they're freaking out, they're breathing funny, they're screaming, they're feeling those pins and needles, they're feeling the physiological response. And then if they do some breath work and stay there, sooner or later you see there's like a shift, a switch. That switch is going into that dorsal branch. It's shutting them down. It feels very nice because it is numbing, and it puts us into that state. When we come out of the water, because eventually we're going to come out of it, the system reboots because it has to. If you're healthy, it will reboot. It will reboot, and the blood will start to pump. The blood pressure will start to come back. The perfusion of the skin, the capillaries, will start to move through. Adrenaline will get pumped out to kick that back up. That sympathetic response will start to rev the system up again. It's kind of like the shaking response of the polar bears coming out. So what happens, in my prediction, and a lot of my colleagues would agree with this, is people are not so much they're doing this because there is a draw, there is an addiction to the rush that occurs when you come out of it. Doing this once, not a big deal. Maybe even doing this once a month, not a big deal. But what's occurring is people are doing this daily as a practice, and a lot of people are kind of all fluffing their feathers up saying, I don't drink coffee anymore, I don't need to do this anymore. And my hunch, this is my prediction, is that they're becoming addicted to that shift from the dorsal to the sympathetic. And then of course, it then might bring them back down to more baseline, but it becomes this cycle, kind of like being addicted to a shaking response that just keeps looping. And then the dangers of this cold therapy in this way, remember, general hydrotherapy where you're having a nice cool swim in a lake in the summer, or hot tub to a cold shower, again, it's a few seconds is very different than minutes at a time. And so I lost my train of thought there. This cold therapy, if we do this, my hunch is we start to train ourselves to go into that shutdown really damn easily. And all it takes is the system to have a stressor during the day, something that is a little intense, a little stressful, and we might become better at going into shutdown. For those of us that already live in shutdown, or maybe we live in a lot of sympathetic, this is bringing us into that happy place where everything is kind of cool and numbed out, but it's also what we would call in the spiritual meditative world, spiritual bypass. The cold exposure therapy is not spiritual, it is a physiological bypass. It's a real bypass that's working at the level of this physiology. So I'm just gonna zoom through here to see if there's anything. Okay, I'm only going to hit on the questions that are connected to what I just spoke about with the ice. Okay, I saw some questions about daydreaming, and I'm actually going to mention that in a second, so hang on. Okay. And we linked up another video I did on the ice bathing, because it is something that's becoming really popular, and I don't know, I'm worried that it's giving people a physiological imprint that isn't good. Okay, I saw a question on shaking, so I'm gonna move to that. This is from Nina. She asks, ooh, come on. All right, doesn't want me to do that. Bear with me here, everyone. Sorry, guys. Okay, here we go. Now I can see the whole message. So you said, so if you've developed the capacity to hold emotions and are able to remain present and aware of bodily functions, is Trey then much more likely to be effective? Not necessarily, because here's the thing. If we are in good capacity and we know how to track the sensations and the movement of the sensations and the biology, we shouldn't need something to pull that out of us. And this is where it's almost like this existential question, like, is that even needed? And breath work is what I'm going to talk about next. So this goes nicely into that. Like, do we need that to get the system to move that out? From my experience in working with folks, that natural shaking response, if there is one that wants to get out, the completion of procedural memory, it will come out. The only thing that would stop something coming out is if we are disconnecting, or if we're living in an environment that is not safe, and part of our subconscious, unconscious brain is like, you can't do that because your husband's going to think you're weird, or you can't do that because that's not what occurs, blah, 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 blah. I mean, insert how we stop ourselves from feeling and expressing the things that are naturally coming out of our system. This is why I say one of the first things to start doing is to really let your biological impulses move through. If you have to pass gas, pass gas. If you need to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. If you're hungry, eat. If you're thirsty, drink water. When you're full, stop eating, right? When you want to say something, say something. When you're tired, let yourself feel tired. Coming back to those natural impulses will train us. It's funny to say that, but it will restore, really is the better word. It'll restore us back to that element of just being who we're meant to be. So again, there has been this allure to things that help move things out faster. I am, like I said at the beginning, more of a purist, because I would rather someone spend a few years building their capacity in their system, so that as they build that capacity, not only they are building the capacity so that procedural memories can start to move and emotions, but so that their immune system is improving, their gut system is improving, their cardiovascular system is improving. This comes back to that analogy I give in my Healing Trauma video series of, we're building the foundation so the house can stay solid on it. But if we just start putting furniture into the house before that blueprint and that engineering process and that foundation is laid, the furniture in the room might stay, but it might just crumble down to the ground floor because there's nothing holding it up. So again, this comes back to, to try to really impress upon all of you, see this as a long term. It isn't about getting the trauma out. It's about building capacity so the entire system restores health. And what we found, I've seen, Kathy Kane has seen this, my colleagues have seen, when someone has had an early upbringing of adversity, lots of trauma, lots of stress, and then they had that car accident and they had, the attack or whatever, where there is more shock trauma, when we work with that baseline regulation and we build capacity back to the system, a lot of those old shock traumas resolve by themselves. We don't even need to work with them anymore because the system becomes smarter in general. That's why my program is called Smart Body, Smart Mind. We're creating a smarter body so that everything just flows. So hopefully that answers your question, Nina. Hey, Carissa. Good to see your name pop up. Okay, I'm going to get into breath work after I take a sip of water. How's everyone doing? We've got 113 people here. Okay. Tina, will you challenge Wim Hof on the embodiment conference where you are both speaking? That's right. I'm part of a conference this coming October, which is far ways away, but I'm not going to be talking with people in a panel. We're all going to be doing our own presentations. So My interest isn't in challenging. It's not in challenging what a person's doing. It's up to you guys to decide on what you do and how you go about your healing. And some people will be drawn to what he does. You know, millions are. And I think it comes down to you, the person, you, the consumer. What do you want to do? How do you want to go about your healing process? And here's the other thing. And again, this goes lovely into breath work. If we're doing something well and we're regulating our system, there will be no need to do these things. There will be no need to have a cold plunge to wake ourselves up in the morning. There will be no need to do big breath work to bring us oxygen to our cells, because the nervous system is just doing it naturally, because that's what it's intended to do when it is healthy. When the system is healthy, we don't need to add extra into the system so that it can function at optimal levels. As a humanity, we don't understand that because we haven't seen what that looks like. If you go into some of the very few places in the world where people are still living off of the land, they're not connected to technology. I mean, I don't even know, I should look into it. There are very few. You go to these, you see, spreads in National Geographic of people in the Amazon, and they are vibrant, these people. They are fit. They are not mentally unwell. They're healthy. They take care of their babies in an attuned way. The kids are happy. It's just different. And we as a Western, call us Western population living in this more industrialized, westernized world, we're so far off that because we're in this more industry-based society. Therefore, our systems aren't recouping and organically expressing the ways that it needs to get out. If we think about these tribes, their version of church is singing and dancing and chanting and moving and being with people and making crazy faces, things that get that ventral vagal of the parasympathetic going. They move all day because they're working on the land, they're washing their clothes by hand, they're pounding grain, they're making things with their bodies. And so we have this very interesting situation where we don't typically do that. And it's hurting us. And we need to find, I believe, the practices that can restore that baseline regulation and that vigor back without having it be so fractured that we don't know what to do next. In other words, when we do wake up and we're feeling panic or anxiety, with the right knowledge and the right capacity, we can then feel that, ride those waves, rather than trying to breathe it away, tap it away, change it away, shake it out. We just work with it in an organic way. So that sidetracked me a little bit, but back to the breath. So I'm going to quote Dr. Feldenkrais, Moshe Feldenkrais. He formed a method called the Feldenkrais method. That's a part of my training. I studied the Feldenkrais work back in 2004. I still teach the Feldenkraisian movement practices when I do my up and down work with Ilya and Marak. The Feldenkrais work is within my online programs, not to the extent that you would get if you were to work with me one-on-one in a group. But he would say that it is important to do nothing that resembles breathing. I'll say that one more time. He would say, do nothing that resembles breathing. And the reason he says that, and he said that, is because he understood how breath works. So right now, fact, the reason all of us are breathing and we have oxygen coming in is because of something called pressure, atmospheric pressure, right? It's so strange, but we live in an oxygenated world. Earth has oxygen, right? And so because of the pressure difference in our lungs, when we shift our lung capacity and move it just naturally without big breath, just normal, it automatically makes the air come in without us having to think about it. And so for him, he would say, do nothing that resembles breathing. In other words, just let yourself be normal and breathe. Now, when we've had past traumatic events, traumas, etc., our breath response is going to be skewed usually, and I'm going to use an example. So say we had bad things happen to us when we were young. We went into these fight, flight, freeze patterns where we had to brace, where we had to contract. We would, hold our breath. There'd be flinches, all these things that would disallow this to just breathe normally and naturally. If we think back to that polar bear, when he started to breathe again, it was this, and then it was just normal because he was reinflating oxygen to get to the cells. But once that's there, he doesn't have to keep, he's not continuing to take those deep, deep breaths. It's just done. He just wouldn't. It would be ludicrous if he was to keep doing that kind of big breath work. And so we have had these traumas occurred to us, and because we have disallowed our system to process them and integrate them naturally because of our higher brain or the people around us saying, don't cry, don't shake that out, even though, the system wants to do something funky. We've been taught, don't do these things. And so then our natural, that thing that the polar bear did where he started to breathe, that response gets screwed up. And so then we spend, and I'm being a little dramatic here, but then we spend our entire lives trying to learn how to breathe again because we never got that reset after those traumatic events or that one traumatic event. And it is a structural thing. Like when we have a shock trauma and we brace, the fascia, the tissue, the organs, the diaphragm, even parts of our spine, because our lungs go all the way up to here, believe it or not, like huge, right? Huge area. So everything around that is in a state of, we could say, shock. It's in a bracing pattern. That's the real word. Everything is braced. And so part of what we want to do is we want to restore the flow and the movement and the breath back. But from my experience, when we build the capacity back, when we get gentle, soft connection back to these areas that have been braced, it restores the breath naturally. There are some lessons that I teach that do involve breath, but it isn't to get as much air in and out as possible. It's to actually have focus and intention in parts of the chest and belly and movement so that we're waking up gently the tissues that have been braced for some of us decades, some of us more than 50, 60 years. And so rather than so imagine this for example, everyone. Imagine you've got this braced system that is so stuck and so hypervigilant, and the system structures are still tight and taut, and you try to force it with air by, breathing in a lot, and then there's all these different ways of hyperventilating, breathing in, holding oxygen, blowing out, so many. And you're doing that in this rigid structure. Sure, you're getting more oxygen in and you're creating this funky CO2, O2 balance where you might feel lightheaded, you might feel euphoric because you're screwing with the acid-base balance of the blood chemistries. So you're feeling this physiological shift, no doubt about it, because it is a physiological shift. It's like the cold therapy, right? Dorsal shutdown kicks you back into sympathetic when you get out. But if you have this rigid structure that is still taut and frightened and doesn't know how to feel the little trickles of emotion, the little trickles of procedural memory, all those little sensory pieces, et cetera, the system is going to still stay rigid. And we will need to keep doing these big breath work things to basically reignite energy in the body. But as I said a little while ago, when the regulation and the resiliency and the restoration back to the organ tissues, the cardiovascular system, the immune system, the endocrine system, when it is back in flow, even the muscular systems, I didn't mention that, and even our skeletal system, when there is more flow back, the system just is there naturally there. We don't need to enforce more oxygen and CO2 out. Now, let's say we all decided to go for a hike up the Grouse Grind. I live in Vancouver. There's this really big, steep hike. And we go up this hike and we're using our muscles. We're going to breathe more, right? I need to get oxygen in. I need to get the CO2 out. And we do that because we're trying to get the lactic acid out. CO2 creates lactate. So if we're increasing our metabolism and we're running and we're hiking and we're cleaning the house and we're boxing or whatever it is that we do, we want the breath to get bigger and bigger, bigger, but it's doing it in relationship to the activity we're doing. And because of that, we're warming up the system. The muscles are getting warm, the tissues are getting oxygenated because we're moving in aerobic capacity. And so that big breath is coming in because things are warmed up. So it's really important to understand that because of our disconnection to ourselves and not knowing how to resolve the traumas and the hurts piecemeal, by that I mean as they come, we've stored them in these patterns of bracing and stored procedural memory, there is a allure, again, to try to move that emotion out quickly, but it's just not going to do anything in the long run. And I wanted to read something. Let's see if I can find. This is on Instagram, so it's public. So I was talking about this call, and a woman named Kat, who is local to here, said. And she's studying to become a somatic trauma therapist. So this is super cool. But she's like, oh, this is in regards to breath. Oh man, she said, I used to big time engage in number one myth. So breath work, teaching cathartic, conscious, connected breath work. And then face palm. She says, it's all the rage right now too. And she goes, because she understands, it's great if you have robust capacity and a wide window of tolerance, and not so much if you don't, like I didn't. And then she said, live and learn. And the thing is she's right. Like if there's robust capacity, it's not going to do much. It'll just give you a hit of oxygen. It'll get your CO2 out. If there's regulation on board, not a big deal, actually. It's just an exercise. Maybe that's a way to bring presence to the body. But if you're doing it in an attempt to regulate the nervous system, it won't work. And I'm not the only one talking about this. Peter Levine is in the same camp. Kathy Kane, same camp. Most, if not all of the people within that somatic experiencing world, somatic practice world, we know that it doesn't do the trick because we have people coming in who have tried to do all of that and they're still a mess. Their nervous systems have got this underlying sympathetic, parasympathetic shutdown energy that is still running the front of their bus. But they're using the breath work as a way to cope and manage the physiological elements that they don't want to feel. And if we flood the system with enough oxygen or put ourselves into a lightheaded space and euphoric space, sure, we're not going to feel anything because we're in that different physiological state. But once that physiological state is gone, then what? And this is why many of these people have to keep doing this every day, multiple times of the day, to give themselves that hit. I know it's controversial, but these are really practices that were popular in the 60s. Again, bioenergetics, William Reich's work, getting this catharsis going, but we just have seen that due to our constitutions as humans having this core dysregulation, it isn't helping. So I'm going to go back to the comments here. I'm going to have a little bit of water. Claire says, makes so much sense. I was so much worse with the large hyperventilating breaths. And then someone says, it makes sense what I say, but what about teachings of yoga that have included breath techniques since thousands of years? Again, I think it comes back to there's nothing wrong with some of these techniques and practices. I know that, again, my colleague Ilya, who I teach with, co-teach with, he is big with Tai Chi and Qigong, and we will do these movements with our hands, beautiful movements of up and down and capacity, and we'll in and then, but when we do it, we are very diligent at saying to someone, just because I'm going this big doesn't mean you should be going this big, because that's my capacity. Your capacity might be here, in, because that's what feels good. But if everyone's like, the teacher's doing this, I better do this big, we instantly go into overriding what we're naturally able to do naturally. So again, a lot of these cultural practices, and this is where meditation comes in, I'll do that next, are getting people to do this. But if there's already baseline regulation involved, then it doesn't really matter, because the system is healthy and these practices are a higher level practice. I know there's practices where you have one nostril and the other nostril and you hold the breath and you this and that and you out, and and you move with the breathing, inhale on the arms up, exhale on down. Again, nothing wrong with that. But what I've seen in our culture, in our westernized system, is that we go to these classes and we get so rote about you have to breathe a certain way. You always have to breathe in on this movement and out on that movement. It doesn't train us to be diverse and differentiated for all sorts of situations. I would much rather my students just know how to feel their internal state and keep flow in the state, so that when they have an accident or they're confronted with something they don't like, they can notice what's occurring in their breath, notice, I'm holding, interesting, and then shift it, reorient so that that boots back up naturally, rather than them trying to do a practice to get the breath going again. So comparing us to a lot of the ancient practices, it's starting to become less of a hot topic for me, because those civilizations did not live in the current world that we are in right now. It's so different. Okay. And true story, Peter Levine kind of stumbled across his work back in the late 60s because he was working with a woman who had what we would now call fibromyalgia. There wasn't a name for it back then, due to old traumatic responses that were held in the system. And she was a mess. She was anxious. She had chronic pain, all these things. And the first thing he got her to do was to take a deep breath to try to calm her system down. And her whole system said, screw you. She didn't say screw you, but her system went into more panic, more arousal, because it actually didn't want to come down because it was so high up. And this is where the nuance of this somatic work is really cool to me, is it's about teaching ourselves how to be like that polar bear that I mentioned, but as humans with this complex brain. That ain't easy. My students can attest, who have gone through Smart Body, Smart Mind, this is not something that you are masters at over a 12-week period, right? Even myself, who has been doing this work and has developed this work, is still learning the nuances of my own system as I become more tuned to all the old things that I've stored in my system due to my past. Even with regulation on board, as a young kid, I still have things to learn and feel and be with, because we're living in this structural world that isn't organic, essentially. So let's get into meditation. I did two resources if you want to dive into this deeper, because I'm just going to do the brushstrokes of it today. I did a great interview with one of my colleagues and good friends, Chris Durkees. It's on my YouTube channel, and we talk about what meditation is, the different types of meditation. He used to be a priest. He is no longer a priest, but he was studied I'm going to get this wrong, but it was Jesuit tradition. So he is highly scholarly. He's been in monasteries. He's done the work. And back in the olden days, you didn't get to actually do what we would consider, or what is considered, a high level of meditation until you had done oodles and oodles and oodles. And by oodles, I mean years and years and years and years of prep work, of foundation work. It's very much like the Karate Kid. If you remember that movie, Daniel didn't get to do karate until he washed all of the floors, he painted all of the fences, he waxed all the cars. That diligence of foundation is needed. And so meditation, there are different types, right? There are some where you focus on one thing. There are some that are more expansive, feeling the qualities in the body. I won't get into those. Chris and I get into them in that interview. But what I know from working with folks, if we just keep it on this topic of stored traumatic stress, early trauma, which many of us have lived with and endured and survived, when the system is still in dysregulation and is still living in that heightened state of survival physiology, asking someone to just sit down and be quiet and be with what is there is like pointing a gun to their head. And I've actually had people say things like that to me. I couldn't do it because it was the most terrifying thing to actually tune into what is there. And the guidance around meditation and around mindfulness is it's very clumsy, in my opinion, because it doesn't, some people are getting better, but as a whole, as a general, if we're not able to sense the nuance in our physiology, it is very easy to do what is called, this is where the term of spiritual bypass comes in, to just kind of be there and be like, I'm being very calm and I'm being very good and I'm being very centered. I'm acting, you guys. And I sense all love in the, like, all that stuff. But then if under that there is this, and one of my teachers, Josh, said this the other day, there's like a hamster in a cage behind your back going crazy, right? It's like that. It's like you're just trying to hide that hamster wheel that is running, running, running. And so this idea of going into these mindfulness practices without the knowledge of the physiology of what is actually in the system, in my opinion, it's futile, because it's just bypassing what's actually there. I did an article a little while ago called Why I Believe the Mindfulness Bubble is going to Burst. It's quite a long article, and it gives you everything that you might want to understand around this topic in greater depth. A lot of people have challenged me on that, saying, well, meditation saved my life, mindfulness saved my life. I have no doubt that that is true. And I don't know those people's histories. So was that mindfulness, was that meditation keeping things in control so that you didn't beat up your kids, or you didn't kill yourself, or so that you could eat better, or so that you could keep things in check in your house? I know those are a bit dramatic, those examples, but if a practice like breathwork, like meditation, positive thinking, which I'll get into, if that is what a person needs to stay safe and to not harm others, then please do it. And if we take this one step further, if we really look at, do we want to become creatures that can let go of that control and not need to have that controlled sense of being? Can we get to that point of letting that out so that we're not trying to micromanage what is there? Again, I would rather all of you work with what is there so that the whole system can restore, as opposed to influencing the system with a practice to keep things in check. And there are definitely cases of people who are high-level meditators, gurus even, who end their lives, who go and we find that they overdose on drugs. And people don't understand. They don't understand why that's happening. This happened recently nearby in my home province here of British Columbia. I'm forgetting the name of the very high renowned meditation teacher who overdosed on fentanyl. Of course, I don't know him, I don't know the history, but when you watch his videos, you can see the unbelievable sense of strain and held rage in his lips. I have this weird habit of watching videos of people that have passed in that way. I'll turn off the volume and I'll study their facial expressions. And you can see the stored survival stress in the wrinkles of their face, in the way that they talk, in the way that their tone and their intonation is just so monotone. And under that, I can sense, because I have this capacity due to the work I do and just being attuned and regulated, you can feel that person is shoving it all in. Again, I know that's a bold thing to say, but I'm just seeing so much of it that it's really important that we understand what's happening right now. So definitely check out the video I did with Chris Durkees. It's a great talk. He's a great guy. And then the article that I wrote on the mindfulness bubble and how I feel that it's going to burst. If not, it is already bursting. Someone says here, mindfulness sent me further into my drug addiction when I was introduced to it when I was put off work 5 years ago for stress. Interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Michael. You know, it's so interesting because that we know that addiction happens because a system is desperately trying to soothe. It's that, you know, all the addictions, all the behaviors we do that are not good for us, that are harmful to us or other people, especially with kiddos, you know, a child that has explosive anger and rage and ADD, they're not trying to do that to be troublesome. They're doing it because their physiology is screaming inside and they don't know how to express it, so the behavior takes over. And it's the same with addiction. It is a behavior that is there to try to help soothe that which we don't know what to do with. So it's a really important thing to understand this. Tina says, mindfulness is meditation as any other needs a proper teacher who is trauma informed. Definitely. I know now that at Spirit Rock, which is a meditation center down in California, they are asking, I don't know if they're still doing this, but a few years ago, it was demanded that all of the teachers have at least, I think, the first year of SE training under their belt, which is a start. This is really good. But I heard through the grapevine when they did their long retreats there, they would have an ambulance waiting. True story, because people's physiologies, in my opinion, probably couldn't take that massive immersion and their systems were just going into physiological chaos or shutdown. So it's really important to understand that this is not stuff to play with lightly. I think it's really important to understand that we still don't fully understand how the human system works. If you read books on neuroplasticity, stories of people who had parts of their brain missing and they didn't even know until they had an MRI, and it was like, how is this person even functioning? And it's because the system reroutes, it rewires, it figures out a way to survive, right? Okay. I'm going to get into the next one, which is positive thinking. And I got something to read around this. I know that there's probably a few comments and questions above, and I'll look at them quickly when we get to this next one. I did see a few about medication, so I'll just answer that quickly. I am not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist. I think that we have to know our system and know where we're at. I mean, if someone's a diabetic and they need to take insulin, then my God, take your insulin, right? If someone has an infection and they need antibiotics, take the antibiotics. You know, there are certain things that I think we need to really be smart about and not stupid about. You know, there are real medical problems that actually could use real pharmaceutical help. Just depends on what it is. In terms of psychotropic meds that we take for anxiety and depression, things like benzodiazepines, SSRIs, all of these medications. I have seen more harm than good with them. I know that there are many people that will say if it wasn't for the meds that they were on, they would not be around. And I think that's important information too. The thing that I want to really stress upon folks is that a medication isn't going to regulate the nervous system at the core level. It'll change the chemistry of the brain and the chemicals, but that actual deep level regulation, from what I know, that isn't changing it. There's no magic pill for that. The other thing with a lot of the meds, again, this is just what I've seen with my clients and students, the withdrawal effects are severe. And so, if someone is going to their doctor and their doctor is suggesting this because there's this anxiety that just won't go away, you've got to listen to your gut. And if anything in your system is like, I don't want to do that, really listen to that. Because I've talked to people who felt that and didn't listen, and now they're in a pickle because they can't get off of these drugs. So you got to be really smart and listen to your system. And also know that most of these pharmaceuticals were not intended for long-term use, right? They weren't intended to be used for years upon years upon years. They were meant for acute problems of not being able to sleep, of not being able to come down after a highly traumatic event, things like that. So just be very cautious, be very smart, do your homework. And again, what I've seen is a lot of what we think of as not solvable and not healable, when we get into this somatic system and really work with the body at this nervous system level and the organ systems and how we connect to the environment, stuff changes in the grand scope of life pretty fast. So that's my opinion on medication. Someone had a question about, it's a common thing we're hearing right now, depersonalization, derealization. To me, it falls in the same category as dysregulation of the nervous system. So it comes back to restoring capacity to be with our system, how to stay connected to the ground under us, the environment around us, to work at all these organ system levels that I've mentioned. It's hard for me to give just specific tips, Jillian. I see your question there. I would recommend, if you haven't yet, to download the healing trauma training that's happening right now. And on my website, I do have a few audio downloads that you can do and try. So those are all there for you guys to pick up for free. Know that those audio downloads are not the full meal. They are tasters, because the work, when we get into working with the whole system, it is comprehensive. It can't be done in one 30-minute audio or even 10-minute audio. It takes time. Because we're essentially, this comes back to that video I mentioned, for those of you that have been here the full hour and a bit, that we're learning how to regulate the nervous system is like learning how to speak a second language as an adult and speak it fluently. It isn't going to come overnight. It's not going to come with just a few tips. It's going to come with full immersion, full commitment, and really wanting it. Right? If you want to learn a second language, you got to want it, because it's going to be hard work. Okay, positive thinking, the dangers of it. I learned about this first from this book, When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. I've had this book for many years, so many years that he still has his personal email address in this book, which made me laugh last night when I read that. So he's come a long way since then. For those of you that don't know Gabor Mate, he's a physician, author. He actually lives here in Vancouver, British Columbia. And he's really, if you want good reading on the nervous system, on disease, on illness, on addiction, taking care of teenagers, kids, his books are all great. This is probably by far the book I quote and reference the most. But he has an entire chapter on the power of negative thinking, which in itself is worth buying the book for, but you should just read the whole book. So he says here, I'm gonna read this because I'll just read it and then I'll speak to it. So one of the things he says here on page 244, Genuine positive thinking begins by including all of our reality. It is guided by the confidence that we can trust ourselves to face the full truth, whatever that full truth may turn out to be. He then writes a little further down, in order to heal, it is essential to gather the strength to think negatively. I'll say that one more time. In order to heal, it is essential to gather the strength to think negatively. Now, to give you context, this book, When the Body Says No, is all about his years as head of palliative care at Vancouver General Hospital, being with patients who were dying way too young of horrible diseases like MS and ALS and cancers and rheumatoid arthritis. And what he found with the bulk of these people is these individuals were always positive, or they were always doing for other people. And he even writes about, he used to look at obituaries, sounds crazy, but people dying of cancer really young. There's even a chapter in here on, is there a cancer personality? And he definitely found that there was. These are people that do everything for everyone. They're on every committee. They volunteer all the time. They're always doing for others. They always make the perfect bundt cake, and their car is clean, their house is clean, they have the perfect marriage, and their kids are all getting straight A's, right? So that is what he found was that cancer personality. And he would read these obituaries, and it was always like that. And basically what he found is that people that tend to get sick, especially with autoimmune illness, and cancer is technically an autoimmune illness, is they had that representation. Everything was for everyone else. And we now know that that way of behaving is an attempt to not feel what is happening inside. So he says, in order to heal, it is essential to gather the strength to think negatively. Negative thinking is not a doleful, pessimistic view that masquerades as realism. I think that's really important. This isn't about being pessimistic and mean to the world. It's just being real. He says, rather, it is a willingness to consider what is not working, what is not in balance, what have I ignored, what is my body saying no to? Without these questions, the stresses responsible for our lack of balance will remain hidden. Let's say that one more time. Without these questions, the stresses responsible for our lack of balance will remain hidden. So, you know, this is really important. I'm going to read one more piece because I like reading his work and I think you'll enjoy it. Same page, next page over. He says, and bear in mind, this is the end of the book, so he's already talked about breast cancer, autoimmune illness, even ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease. He talked about Lou Gehrig and his history and how it was the perfect setup for someone who just didn't know how to take care of himself and only cared about his family and the people around him. So he says, one study conducted over nearly 2 years. So a 2-year study is a long study in science. So one study conducted nearly 2 years found that breast cancer patients with a propensity to engage in pleasant daydreams had a poorer prognosis than their more reality-based counterparts. So did women who reported fewer negative feelings. Someone mentioned daydreaming, so that caught my eye. He also writes, according to another report, one woman with recurrent breast cancer says, patients who reported, or they said, the researchers, patients who reported little in the way of psychological stress and who were rated by others as well-adjusted were more likely to be dead at the 1-year follow-up. The repeated finding that people with happier, less troubled thought patterns can suffer more illness seems to defy common sense. The general belief is that positive emotions must be conducive to good health. While it is true that genuine joy and satisfaction enhance physical well-being, positive states of mind generated to tune out psychic discomfort lower resistance to illness. That was a big chunk, small chunk in the grand scheme of that book. But, you know, he really saw this firsthand. So I have him on my shoulders right now as I talk about the power of negative thinking. As he said, it's not about being pessimistic and mean, but it's about being in reality to what is happening. And I see in my circles, and I see in a lot of other places, that let's just be very positive. And being positive is different than being fake positive. If there is a tear, if there is a rage, if a person wants to scream and say, this is unfair, why me? Let that occur, because that is the bubbling up of what is really there, what the real emotion is, the real sensation. I don't know how many times I've spoken to clients or met people where they're sick and you can see in their lips, they're holding back their tears, they're holding back their rage, they're trying to be positive, everything is going to be fine, I'm doing everything I can, I'm going to fight this disease. From what we've seen, and again, he gets into that book more, having that that mindset, it limits us from feeling what is actually there. And we need to find and feel what is actually there, and then balance it with some healthy optimism and with some feelings of deservingness to stay alive and to heal. But if we are completely jaded by the reality that our system has broken down and is showing up with an illness, we're not going to be able to treat that illness in the way that it needs to be treated. So there's not much more that I want to say about the positive thinking thing, other than it's important to know and catch yourself when you go into that mode, into that MO, right? If someone asks you, mainly your main people in your house, your partners, of course with kids this is different, so let me make a differentiation here. You know, there's this thought that we just have to show our kids all of our emotions. That is not true. At a certain age you can, but when they are young, when they are like under the age of 13, 14, 15 even, we do need to be positive with them. Not in a fake way, but we can't frighten them with our dysregulation, right? So if you know you are a parent or you work with kids and you have dysregulation and your regulation of emotions is not mature and it is due to old trauma, then be very careful about what you expose your kids to. This is why I'm seeing a lot of kids who are now ending up with anxiety disorders and health problems, because their mamas told them too much how sad and angry they were, right? So you've got to shield them a little bit. So you've got to have finesse in this. But if you have a partner, a best friend, a therapist, and they ask you, how are you doing? And it's in your own, privacy without kiddos around, don't say, oh, I'm just fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. Like, it's all good. If it's not all good, don't lie. The moment we lie to those that are close to us about how things are, we are putting toxicity back into our system. We're not allowing it to come out. But the kids is a different thing. So I just wanted to add that in there, because there's a lot of confusion about how do I teach my kids to be emotionally intelligent and to not have anxiety. You yourself you have to work on your own regulation. That is the magic bullet. That is the ticket to teaching them how to be healthy humans, is you yourself need to be healthy and in good nervous system check, because they will feel it. If you are putting on a show, they'll know that something isn't right. They can feel that hamster in the cage running, even if you're trying to, not show it to them. So it's all about finesse. It's about differentiation. All of these topics, breath, shaking, cold therapy, meditation, positive thinking, it all comes down to understanding that it's not, breath isn't bad, shaking isn't bad, meditation isn't bad, going into some cold water isn't bad, positive thinking isn't bad. It's that there is this nuance that we have to understand. And the only way to really see that nuance, from my experience, is to work on your own system and get to know the language of your nervous system. So it's really important to practice this stuff. Someone asks, how do you repair after not knowing that you were dysregulated as a parent? Work on yourself. Do as much as you can to provide safety for those kids. And this is going to sound like a joke, but it's not. Put a savings fund away, so when they need to start to do this work as adults, you can offer them money, because right now we need money to do this work. So that's there for them. I have found with kids, it is hard. They're different. You can't enforce therapy on them unless they really want it. And usually they're too young. So this is where really understanding your own physiology If they're really young, play is super important. If they're teenagers, you kind of got to let them do what they do and just make sure that they stay safe in their general day-to-day. And then when they become adults, just have the intention that they will find their own way. Many of us, many people know that they did things wrong, and that's okay. It's like, yep, that was not the way to do it, and everyone's still alive, and I'm going to work on myself and just in some ways have faith that they will find their way too, just as all of you are here right now. All right, I've been talking for an hour and 40 minutes, so I'm going to sign off. I apologize if there have been questions here that haven't been answered. I think we covered a lot. I have had some really strong Q&A calls last week, and the week before was on chronic illness. Last week was on what it means to be trauma-informed and trauma-trained. Please know that I have new videos that come out on YouTube. I've got one that just came out last Sunday on somatic symptoms and how those come up. The one coming out this Sunday is all on exercise. And then the one the following week is all on what it really means to work with the nervous system and how it is more than just the nervous system we are working with. So stay tuned to all of those. As I said, deliberately telling you we're in a very special, unique time of the year. If you want to work with me and my team, Smart Body, Smart Mind opens up for registration on February 17th. We only have registration open for 2 weeks, I think, until March 1st, and we start March 2nd. This is the only time we run it this year. So if you want to work with me, now is the time to do that. Get on to the Healing Trauma Training if you haven't already. 3 videos, that is a complimentary training. I think everyone should learn those informations that are on those videos, get into the worksheets. There's three worksheets with that. And there's also a private Facebook group. If you're not part of that group, Healthy Nervous System Revolution, get into that group because we have my team in there are answering questions within specific threads of that group. If you have any questions that are more admin based, my team, just email us, support@irenelyon.com. If you haven't gone to my website, check it out. It's just my name. Thank you for being here. Thanks to Crystal, who's been my little secret person putting the links up. If you're watching this as a replay or on YouTube, thanks for watching. We'll get the links down below as well. And be well, everyone. Take care. And really let this sink in. Really see that what we're doing here is a completely different way of looking at things. And I will be as bold to say that it is the right way. I have seen a lot in this world. I've been doing this work since I was in my mid-20s, starting in the fitness and nutrition industry. I've never been so sure about something ever in my life, and I'm seeing it in what occurs when my students and clients and my colleagues, what they see and how things change. So do your work, take care, keep learning, and we will see you when we see you next. Bye for now.